everyone! So in a previous video I mentioned that I will be going to Comic-Con in San Diego this year. So obviously I had to make myself a costume, and obviously I am going to show you guys how I did it. So I decided I wanted to be San from Princess Mononoke. So I'm actually going to split this costume into 4 videos because it would be way too long if I tried to do everything in one video. I will be doing a video on how to make the mask and the cape. I will be doing a video on how to make her accessories. I will be doing a video on how to do her weapons. And lastly, I will be doing a video on how to do her dress and apron thing. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make her mask and cape. Let's get started. For the mask and ears, I used a 10-inch styrofoam half sphere, a utility knife, a marker, masking tape, cardboard, a hole saw. I used one that was about 1.5 inches. You probably could just use a utility knife for this, but the hole saw will give you a perfect circle. Air drying clay. I was going to make myself a batch of the paper clay that I've made a tutorial for before, but I ran out of time with this project, so I had to use store-bought stuff. It worked out alright. A popsicle stick to help me sculpt, water, sandpaper, paint, drill bits or an awl or something to poke holes with. And for the cape, I used white faux fur, scissors, measuring tape, tailor's chalk, pins, 2 buttons, a yarn sewing needle, and yarn. So first, I wanted to make the mask be a tiny bit more shallow and not a perfect half sphere, so I marked about 1 inch from the edge and cut that off. Then I roughly divided the sphere into quadrants, and then used the marks as a guide on where to place the design. I just used some circular items I had laying around to help me make the mouth and eyes, and sketched in the rest of the details, using a reference as a guide. I used a hole saw to cut circles for the eye holes. Since styrofoam is so soft, I could just twist the bit with my hand. I started to draw out the mouth hole, but then I realized that I didn't really want to. I figured I could just paint that part black. For the little eye details, I wanted it to look carved, so I scored those lines with a utility knife and kind of compressed the styrofoam with a hard tool. To clean up the edges and to stop the foam from flaking off everywhere, I used masking tape. Then I started covering the whole mask with clay. I wanted to keep it on the thin side so it wouldn't get too heavy, so I mixed some of the clay with a little bit of water to make a thin paste. And then I smeared it on, trying to smooth out any imperfections, like from the tape or any dents, and the spot where I almost cut the mouth out. I rolled some snakes of clay to put around the mouth, eyes, and the rest of the details. To help these parts stick, I re-wet the clay on the mask, and then a little bit on the snake of clay, and then I laid it over and then used my popsicle stick to help blend the edges together. After I added the eye bits, it ended up getting quite heavy, so I ended up cutting about half of the clay from each eye piece. Once I was done adding detail with clay, I let it dry. While that was drying, I worked on the ears. I took a piece of cardboard about 6 by 6 inches. With the corrugation running up and down, I marked the halfway point. Then, from the bottom, I measured 2 inches out from the middle and 1.5 inches out from the top. In the middle, I marked 2 inches up from the bottom, and then I connected the top marks at that point in a straight line. Then I connected those points to the very bottom points in a slightly curved line. I actually ended up altering these later so they'd sit more slanted, so the lines actually would be something like this. You'll see what I mean later. I cut it out and repeated it to make a second ear. I scored down the middle of the ear and then taped the straight edges together. I held the ear open until it was the sort of shape I wanted, and then I placed it on a piece of scrap cardboard, traced the shape, and cut those base pieces out, and then taped them in place. Then I went along and taped along all of the edges. Then I used paper clay to smooth everything out. I tried to use minimal clay here to keep things as light as possible. When the clay was dry, I used some sandpaper to smooth everything out. This generates a lot of dust, so make sure to use a dust mask if you make one of these. I wiped over all of the pieces to remove any dust, and then I got to painting. Originally, I tried to just paint right onto the mask with the colors that I wanted to use, but I quickly realized that the red that I was using was quite translucent, so I ended up mixing some of that red with some white gesso to make a sort of primer, and then I painted that over the whole mask and the ears. Then once that was dry, I went through and painted the mask. It looked pretty good like this, but I thought it was sort of missing a little bit of something, so I decided to do sort of a weathering / aging technique to help the details pop. To do this, I watered down a bit of deep brown paint, and then I painted it into the crevices of the mask, and before it could really dry, I wiped those spots down with a paper towel so the paint sticks in the crevices. I repeated that on the ears, and here's how the paint job turned out. When that was dry, I went through and used a drill to drill out holes in the ears and mask, but I think that ended up being kind of overkill because the material is so soft. I probably could have just poked it with the needle that I'm going to use later, but whatever. I made sure to make the holes for the mask go halfway down so that when I wear the cape with the hood off, the mask doesn't flip backwards. When I started trying to place the ears, I realized that they stuck out in a way that I didn't really like, so I had to cut a wedge out of them like this and then hot glue them back together so that they would have more of a slant at the base. Now to make the cape, I laid out my faux fur with the direction of the fur going downwards. I used some measuring tape and draped it over my shoulder and then found the measurement at the point right around my knees. And using that measurement, I traced this rough shape onto the fabric with some chalk. On the sides, I gave myself a few more inches of extra fabric because I planned on folding them in and sewing them up. And then I cut it out. I actually ended up cutting this neckline a little too big, so I pinned it in the middle like so and sewed up that bit to make it a bit smaller. Then I traced a quick tail shape, cut it out, pinned it up, and sewed it along this edge. I turned it right side out, pinned it to the bottom of the cape, and sewed it on. Using an existing hood, I traced the shape onto my fur, making sure to have the fur pointed down still. I actually ended up cutting another hood out because this bit ended up being too short. Technically it fit me, but it fit too well and it looked a bit weird with the mask and whatnot attached. I wanted it to have kind of a looser fit. I measured around the neckline of the cape and used that measurement to adjust the bottom of the hood pattern. I cut that out, pinned it together, and sewed it up along this edge. I ultimately cut 4 pieces like this, essentially making 2 hoods, and then I put them right sides together, pinned along this edge, sewed it together, and then turned it right sides back out. I made sure to line the hood so that when I had the mask off and on my back, you wouldn't be able to see the raw side of the faux fur. I pinned the hood onto the neckline and sewed it up. Then I sewed the buttons onto each side of the cape. This is for the necklace piece that I'll be showing you how to make in the next video. I took a comb and brushed out the seams on the cape. This pulls the fur that's trapped by the stitching and helps blend the seams. Finally, I used a yarn sewing needle threaded with some yarn to sew the mask and ears in place. And here's how it turned out. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. If you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. I post art videos every Tuesday and DIY videos every Thursday. You can follow me on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, and Snapchat, and I'll leave the information to those down below. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below. And don't forget, next week I will be showing you how to make some of her accessories. I'll see you then.